This is my hot take. I don't think there's a point in adding a test just to have code coverage if it doesn't add any meaning specifically. Hey everyone, and welcome back to my channel. So today we're going to be talking about testing and the things that I've learned throughout my software development career about testing and good practices and why testing is so important. So no matter what project you work on or which company you work at, testing your code will always have a place, somewhat of a place, in the product or project that you're working on. And testing is really important for a lot of reasons. Today, I'm going to share my top 5 things that I've specifically learned about testing. So number 1, testing saves lives. So testing your code is that final security gate you have to get through to actually get your code into production. If you have a product or project in the medical industry and you're responsible for thousands and thousands of patients, if there's something wrong with it or something goes wrong, like there's a bug that gets through, you could potentially be harming that person. So you want to make sure that barrier for what is work in progress code and deployable code is as strong as possible, because you don't know what could happen. You could lose a company billions of dollars, you could hurt someone, anything could happen if you don't have your code tested properly. And you let little things get through the cracks, or even major things get through the cracks if they're not tested. I guess in general, would you trust your life to a program that you know is not tested properly? Like, would you let your self-driving car drive you around if it hadn't gone through trial runs and been tested thoroughly in the first place? I personally wouldn't, so test your code. The second thing I learned is that in the long run, tests actually help save time. There's a lot of testing that you can automate through CI/CD pipelines, which are pipelines that run as soon as you push your code onto a branch, or like a development branch or the main branch, for example. And if this is all automated, it makes things a lot easier, so you don't have to run the code every single time you push. You can just rely on the pipeline to do it for you. So if you have tests that run every single time instead of you having to do that manual check for that small change every single time, it saves you more time because you can just rely on it to run and you don't have to go and manually run every single check. Not only that, but if you have a reliable test suite, you can push changes to your code and know that you didn't break anything that was implemented before that. And personally, that increases confidence in code for me. If I know I have to personally go through a checklist to make sure that I'm checking every single manual thing that I possibly could, I get really stressed, and I can't imagine what it's like to have to do that for everything you push, every single time for a feature that you keep iterating on, or even products that you keep iterating on. What if one thing you implement in place X affects something in place Y? If you have a test suite there, it saves you time from having to go and check those like several different places. So the third thing I learned, tests need to be meaningful. So if a lot of you implemented code before or tests before, you probably know that there's such a thing called code coverage. So code coverage is essentially how much of your code line by line is covered through your tests. So there's a lot of tools out there to help you see how much code coverage you have, and if you check out this video here, I've actually talked about one that I use when I use VS Code. So while code coverage is really useful, there are tools that sometimes will highlight a line of code that it thinks hasn't been covered by the tests, but it actually has. Or if you implement a test for that case, it doesn't really add any meaning or test anything significant, at which point you're just adding tests for the sake of it. This is my hot take. I don't think there's a point in adding a test just to have code coverage if it doesn't add any meaning specifically. For example, code coverage tools sometimes talk about branch coverage, which is, for example, in an if check, the 2 different branches of the if check were covered. But there's times where it will say that a second case wasn't covered, or at least I've come across it before. But there's no point adding that extra test case or making it more explicit if you already know you have that covered. You can add a lot of mess and redundancy to your tests, which in some cases is good, but not if it doesn't have any value. So the most important thing here is that your tests have to be valuable. It might make your coverage reporter happy, but does it really make you happy to have to write a test that doesn't help anyone? Fourth point. Test maintenance is so important. If you've changed the functionality of your code, for example, added a new argument to a function, or even changed the behavior of a function, it's really, really important that you update your test to reflect this. While the test might pass without you making any update, this could let potential bugs slip through the cracks because that test does not reflect what is actually happening. So while the test may pass without any update to it, but behavior has changed, you need to make sure that that test is actually reliable and testing the right thing. There's no point in having a test that's missing an argument, for example. If you've added something new as an argument to a function and don't update the test to reflect that, and it just uses the default value, you're not testing the functionality of that new bit of code you've added. And that is a huge no-no. So one, you're just not testing it. And two, it could lead to so much tech debt later. You don't have to go back and update every single case of tests that you find that doesn't reflect what happens in the code. Otherwise, it just piles up and it could blow up in the future, figuratively. So basically, it's a lot safer if you update your code as you go and don't cut corners to make sure that your ecosystem is nice and reliable and accurate. And finally, the last thing I learned is that there are a lot of cool tools out there for testing. I had the opportunity a few years ago to go to a JavaScript conference called Assert.js, which was all about testing in JavaScript. So I learned about a lot of cool tools there that companies used, as well as the infrastructure they put in place to make sure that their tests were all reliable and accurate. So everyone had different opinions when it came to testing and different approaches. But the most important thing that every single speaker highlighted was that testing is really, really important. It's so important to have good infrastructure in place, and there's a lot of tools that let you do that. A few of the tools that were shared were built in-house by the companies themselves, which is like, props to you. That's actually amazing that you're able to implement that for your use case. But there was also a lot of ones that are out there for you to use. So for example, Percy and Cypress were shared for front-end testing. And personally, I've actually used Protractor for front-end testing, so those are some tools there that you could use. So the main thing that I've learned about all these tools is that they save so much time and they save you from a huge headache later. And of course, every language has its own framework and several tools that you can use, so I would recommend going out there and finding one that suits your use case specifically. Or even implementing a pipeline yourself that'll help you when you deploy to your production branch. But all in all, I think these frameworks are really important to leverage at every level possible, just to make sure that all your code is up to par. Because otherwise we run into bugs, and no one likes bugs, at least in your code. All right. And that was a quick video about my thoughts on testing and the most important things I've learned about testing throughout my career so far. If I come across any others, I will be sure to update all of you. But I'm also really interested to hear any of your learnings or any of the cool tools you've used in your testing career, and I'd love to know in the comments below. All right, and that's it for me for this week. I will be back soon, and I hope all of you have a wonderful day. See you soon, friends.